So thank you all for joining us. Today's webinar is Defining, Measuring, and Tracking Youth Outcomes. And I'm going to be joined today by Mairead Hartman from the Rochester Area Community Foundation and Ali Leidy from NYSAN. As many of you know, today's webinar is part of the Northeast Networks series of webinars. So the Northeast Networks group is a collaboration of 8 of the Northeast-based statewide after-school networks. And it is, I think, a wonderful example of the kinds of ways that after-school programs are so good at collaboration. The statewide after-school networks, for those of you who are not familiar with us, are partnerships, public and private, that bring together the stakeholders in each state around increasing access to high-quality after-school programs. We're very grateful to the Mott Foundation, who funds us all and helps us practice our coordination skills and encourages these kinds of multi-state collaborations. So our agenda for today, I will start by introducing Mairead Hartman from the Greater Rochester After-School Alliance. She's going to talk a little bit about their outcomes and measures work and give you a good example of a locally driven collaboration around outcomes and data. We'll then talk a little bit about NYSAN's work on statewide data systems and statewide outcomes. And then we'll close with a very brief conversation about advocating for and with data. And we'll have plenty of time left to take questions. Okay, so we are very pleased to have with us today Mairead Hartman, who is a program officer at the Rochester Area Community Foundation and the chair of the Greater Rochester After-School Alliance. GRASA has been around for longer than NYSAN, in fact, and is, I think, a truly stellar example of what local after-school organizing can achieve in terms of supporting program quality and also really increasing access. So, Mairead, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hi, Nora. How are you? Can you
Great.
hear me?
Thank you so much, Mairead.
Sure. So, hi, everybody. My name is Mairead Hartman. Nora mentioned I work as a program officer at the Rochester Area Community Foundation, and I have the great privilege and honor of being the co-chair of our Greater Rochester After-School Alliance, GRASA. So, let's talk just a little bit to set the stage about GRASA. Our mission is to strengthen the quality, quantity, and accessibility of out-of-school time programs in Monroe County for school-age youth through community collaboration. And our vision is that every school-age youth in our community who chooses participates in high-quality out-of-school time programming. And just to help you understand what I mean when we talk about out-of-school time, at GRASA we're talking about before school, after school, summer enrichment, and expanded learning. So we are a volunteer committee. We are made up of funders, policymakers, family and provider representatives, and researchers. The Community Foundation has been convening GRASA since 2001. And Nora mentioned we are a proud regional network affiliate of NYSAN. So thank you so much, everybody, for this opportunity to talk with you today. So the conversation today is part of GRASA's 2011-15 strategic plan. Our first goal within that plan was high-quality out-of-school time programs. And so to begin to address this lofty and significant goal, we did form what we call our GRASA Quality Working Group in September of 2012. And this is our charge, which is a little bit lengthy, but we are developing a comprehensive framework that includes standards of excellence and quality standards specifically around program frontline staff, program management, and the entire system of out-of-school time with a focus on knowledge and skills sharing, professional learning, and professional development. And here we're talking about professional development for individuals as well as strengthening the professionalism of the field. So within that charge, we focus on developing a comprehensive framework to measure achievement of program quality, to identify and promote the use of appropriate tools to ensure that program quality, and to educate and build the capacity of organizations to implement this comprehensive quality framework. So a key goal of ours is to strengthen the current professional development learning system in Rochester and to integrate these efforts of all the respective organizations to create and promote what we're calling our youth program quality improvement process within the community. And so this is going to be achieved. We're in our first year of implementation for the Youth Program Quality Intervention, which is called the YPQI, and it is, I hope many of you are familiar with it. It's based on the framework, research, and evidence provided by the Weichert Center for Youth Program Quality, which is a division of the Forum for Youth Assessment. And I did mention we're in our first year of implementing YPQI. It's been really ambitious and fun and exciting to get underway. These are some of our program sponsors and partners for that YPQI initiative. And you'll see they include the Ford Foundation, our own community foundation, the United Way, the school district. Our partners in implementing include Children's Institute out of Rochester, the Bike Center, and GRASA, of course. And you'll see at the bottom, we do not have a nifty logo for our capacity building partnership for youth development, but they are very much engaged. So what we did first was we did a really thorough review of existing standards and resources related to youth program quality, and we then made a recommendation to our full GRASA table in December of 2012. And we did recommend, and they did agree, to endorse the use in Rochester of quality standards and accreditation processes. And so we really consider the Council on Accreditation's after-school program standards to be the platinum level of standards as well as accreditation, but it's also priced more like a platinum level. So we also recognize the very good work of After School Works New York in their quality standards and accreditation process as well. For tools and assessments, we recommended that we continue to use the Youth Program Quality Assessment Form A. And here in Rochester, we have had 9 years of using the YPQA Form A in a low-stakes community-wide assessment process, where annually we were doing external assessments and taking a snapshot of point in time of youth program quality. We did recommend, however, that we not only do the Form A, but also add the Form B, which includes a look at the administrative practices of the organization and whether they support the frontline staff. We also encourage utilization of the NYSAN Quality Self-Assessment Tool as an internal assessment option and program. So we talked a little bit about this already, so I can skip over most of it, but this is about our recommendation that we do engage in a YPQI process. And the important thing to note here is that it's not only the use of those Form A and Form B tools, but also the pre- and post-external assessments with the self-assessment internally, and that's an important component of the intervention, as well as that planning with data and the coaching and technical assistance that we provide. And this, we hope, allows us to continuously improve program quality. But this is an example, it's actually a visual display of the GRASA quality system diagram. So this is what the quality working group came up with in terms of visually communicating what we mean by a youth program quality system for our community. And I'm happy to report that we have made some significant progress. And so what I've done here is quite crudely overlaid some red ink on top of our original pretty system diagram to show the progress that we have made and the components that we have in place and what is beginning to address that quality system. And you'll see that the inner two rings closest to the core, both of those inner two rings represent what YPQI brings to our community in terms of advancing us in our quality system. So you'll see how important its implementation is here in Rochester. So Nora asked me to talk a little bit about the use of data in Rochester. We do have many efforts underway to promote data-driven decision-making, And this is community-wide, so we have Rock the Future, which is our own Cradle to Career Strive Together initiative. And partnering with ACT Rochester, we also have, with Rock the Future is ACT Rochester, which is our community indicators site. And then Children's Institute has an online relational database. It's called COMET. It allows for data to be entered by providers, and then it's sent to a centralized location where CI is able to analyze the data and report it back to the partners to aid their decision-making. But the United Way of Greater Rochester and Children's Institute, they have partnered, they're in their third year now, to use COMET in all United Way funded after-school programs. And I just want to note quickly that all of their funded after-school programs, they must adhere to our community's Rochester After-School Plan and Model, which we talked about a little bit earlier on our quality system diagram as being part of that overarching framework. So COMET does the reporting that allows community partners and funders to both collect and analyze daily attendance at out-of-school time programs, time in and out of program for each youth, school attendance, so whether or not those young people attend school during the day, and grade point averages. And from the second year of analysis, what they found was that in just 1 year, the 1,500 kids in United Way funded after-school programs did attend 6,100 more days of school than their peers, and they increased their GPAs by an average of 0.87, which is equivalent to 1 full letter grade. So we feel very encouraged by these results and by the use of the Rochester After-School Plan and Model, as well as the use of centralized data collection and analysis that is made possible through COMET. So, outcomes. We seek to establish the community's most desired youth-level outcomes for out-of-school time programs, compare them to national research, and roll out the outcomes to the community for endorsement and use. And we feel, frankly, quite a lot of pressure to identify those outcomes and begin to measure them. So what we did engage about 200 people in the community in determining what our local outcomes are for youth who participate in out-of-school time. So we talked to students, we talked to young people in elementary school as well as high school, parents, providers, funders, researchers, and advocates. We did conduct a nominal group process to identify these outcomes, and I'll share those with you in another slide or two. The second step was a Nazareth College graduate assistant was able to complete a lit review for us. She looked at the national research on youth-level outcomes that are being used nationwide and then compared those outcomes that were identified in her national research with the ones that the community brought forward in our nominal group process. So we created a table. It includes operational definitions for our local outcomes, of outcome elements, and connections to the Common Core state standards, as well as New York State social and emotional learning standards. So we're doing what my colleague calls a crosswalk. And we began to include in the table the assessment tools that we might review. So these are the outcomes that to the top. These are identified by the 200 community voices that we engaged in our process, and they identified the following for Rochester's youth level out-of-school time outcomes: academic competencies, engagement, health and wellness, life and career skills, social relationships, and intrapersonal development. These are the outcomes that rose to the top from our community. So what we did, we created a rubric that allowed us to review existing tools and measures from national efforts related to out-of-school time outcomes. And the main categories, we have many categories in our rubric, but the main categories for consideration were cost, the outcomes assessed by the tool, whether they matched ours, the psychometric properties, including reliability and validity, the user-friendly nature of the tool, and this is important, the individual level data, not just aggregate. And so we have been receiving a lot of input from our school district partners as well as our community partners saying, We want to be able to differentiate the supports that we provide to young people in out-of-school time programs. And so that was a really important component of our consideration for these tools for outcome measurements, that it be individual and not just aggregate. And then finally, our ability to use the tool with COMET, which is a database that I discussed earlier with Children's Institute. So these are the tools that we reviewed. We looked at the mini DESA, which is the Devereux Student Strengths Assessment, the TCRS, the Teacher Child Rating Scale, the Associate Child Rating Scale, the Youth Rating Scale, the SSIS, the small z, and then SAO Youth and SAO Staff. And those are out of Wellesley and NIOS, the National Institute of Out-of-School Time. So we are almost done, I hope. We are closing in on the finish line. What's rising to the top really is the mini DESA for grades kindergarten through 8th grade. And the mini DESA allows for those differentiated supports for youth that we talked about earlier. That's so important in our community, and I'm sure in yours as well. The data can be analyzed at the individual level, in a small group or class level, and then also at the aggregate level. It's very user-friendly. And the mini DESA does yield one score that is a highly accurate prediction of social and emotional competencies. It's nationally normed, and it's being used in other out-of-school time systems, including the United Way-funded sites in Cincinnati and the YMCA's nationwide. Then we said, well, what about the older youth? So if we were to recommend the mini DESA for use in Rochester for grades K-8, what would we recommend for older youth in grades 9 to 12? And so Devereux, I'm happy to say they are developing a high school version of the mini DESA now. It's expected in the fall of 2015. But in the interim, Rochester is going to explore whether we might use the Gallup student poll, which assesses hope, engagement, and well-being, or possibly the Associate Child Rating School for those older grades. So our next steps, just so you know where we stand, we are having conversations with Devereux and Children's Institute now. We just need to confirm that the mini DESA can be used on our COMET web system, and it's important to us that it can be because so many of our out-of-school time programs are already entering their data into COMET. We do not want to create a system of duplicate data entry for any of the partners. We want to streamline this as much as possible. We're going to complete our outcome table. We're going to design a communication tool and strategy, and then we're going to take it back to the community voices that we engaged before, as well as GRASA for endorsement. And then, of course, the tricky work of implementation. And we are aiming to have something implemented beginning September 1st. So we are, the heat is on, and the fire is within us, and we hope to keep this. So that's it for me. Thank you again, Nora and Allie, for the opportunity, and all of you for listening. And this is my contact information if you wanted to follow up with me some more.
Thank you so much, Mairead. I really appreciate it. And as all of you have heard, there's really exciting stuff happening in Rochester. They really are on the cutting edge of thinking about community-wide data sharing and data systems. And we're very excited to have folks like that in New York inspiring and pushing us on the statewide level.
Thank you, Nora.
Okay, so moving on to talk a little bit about our statewide data systems research. Want to start by framing the question, really, what is a statewide after-school data system? And to give you a little bit of the context for this, New York, like many of your states, is currently developing a pre-kindergarten to college completion and career entrance database, which people call the P20. And this is actually was part of New York's Race to the Top application, as it was for many states, and a number of states who did not succeed in getting Race to the Top also are pursuing these databases. But the work here in New York has really been focused on students' participation in the formal education system, which we obviously think is lacking something. At the same time, New York has been home to a number of data-driven collective impact initiatives For those of you who are unfamiliar with collective impact, it's the idea that all the members of the community coming together around certain agreed upon goals and coordinating all of the programming and systems and services in the community towards moving those goals. Cradle to Career Alliance is a major partner of NYSAN's here in New York. Say Yes to Education partners very, very closely with our after-school programs in Buffalo. Many of you may be familiar with the Promise Neighborhoods at the federal level. And all of these initiatives are great places for after-school to participate, but they require data in order to do their data-driven decision-making. We also know that a lot of after-school programs are currently buying their own data systems so they can track enrollment and attendance. We also know that many funders, as we see with the United Way in Rochester, are developing their own data systems and asking folks to upload data to them so that they can do their own analysis. I will highlight the fact that United Way and GRASA have been so sensitive to the goal of not having providers have to use more than one database, and we're very excited about what they're doing with Comet there to try to streamline that. And finally, there's a lot of interest in sharing data between schools and school districts, partners, and after-school organizations, and all of that requires a data system to make that happen. And our concern so far is that despite all of these different efforts around data in a number of different directions, we have no comprehensive data about the impact of after-school statewide in New York. So, NYSAN has started advocating for the development of a comprehensive statewide after-school data system. We are hoping that it would track basic data, such as attendance, for all programs in the state, and that it also would collect outcomes information and be able to link to the P20 data system so that we could make use of that system for doing longitudinal outcomes looks for our students to be able to understand the long-term impacts of participating in an after-school program. We really believe that such a system would reduce costs for providers. The goal really would be a consolidation of all of these different data system efforts into a single data system. That we think that would simplify things enormously and also help programs, particularly small programs that have not had the money to invest in their own data system, to be able to have access to one. We also think it's got tremendous potential in terms of improving program quality so that we can really encourage outcomes tracking and simplify that process for programs. I, of course, am deeply interested and invested in this because I need this data to be able to effectively advocate for increases for after-school programming funding on the statewide level. New York, as some of you may know, is one of the states that's lucky enough to have several statewide after-school funding streams, and I consistently get asked questions about after-school data that I can't answer because we don't have a statewide data system. And obviously, such a system would simplify data sharing with school districts enormously. One of the reasons that NYSAN is advocating for a statewide data system as opposed to advocating that the P20 system include after-school data is that we had initial conversations with the state education department and came to understand that the P20 data system is essentially an aggregation of data from all 700 and some odd school districts in New York, and that if we wanted to get after-school data directly into that system, all of our after-school programs would have to sign MOUs with each school district. So we're talking about literally 700 school districts, each of which having after-school MOUs with 5 or 100, or in New York City, several thousand after-school programs, one-on-one. Or we could have our own after-school data system that would then have one MOU with the state education department around how that data would be shared. Seemed like a much simpler solution in the long run, and definitely something that we were glad we explored early in these conversations. Why do we think this would work? We think this would work because it's already working in cities across the country. So one of our models is right in New York City, where the Department of Community, Youth, and Development has a data system that they use for all of their out-of-school time programs that tracks attendance, enrollment, all sorts of program scheduling information, healthcare contact information. So a tremendous number of different things to help programs in the city be able to organize, but also report to DYCD about their programming. And this is true of many, many large citywide systems in the U.S., several of our best examples being in the Northeast. Providence has one, Boston has one, Philadelphia has just purchased one. And we believe that on a statewide level would really be a scaling up of what's happening in many of these cities. It's also happening in Missouri. We are incredibly excited to look to our counterparts in Missouri as they, as part of an ongoing conversation that's been going on for many years there, are connecting all of their child care, including their school-age child care, to their education data system. This sort of agglomerated system is in process right now, and we hope to actually have a lot of information about how it's working over the next year or two. That will help us understand how this could work in other states. And finally, just worth mentioning that the Boys and Girls Clubs of America has purchased a data system for all of their clubs nationally and is expecting a collection of consistent, comprehensive data from each program that will be fed up into the national level. So again, that's actually a scale that's quite comparable in a lot of ways to what we would be talking about on a statewide level, given how many Boys and Girls Clubs there are. For those of you looking for more information, I'll do a quick shout out to the Wallace Foundation and the National League of Cities, who have a fantastic resource on management information systems that coordinate after-school programs in cities. Is one of the first places that we look for information about how we might scale something like this up at a state level. So we've taken a lot of looks at different data systems that fill this function in different cities and different vendors that provide them. And just to highlight a couple of quick features that are very common to these systems, one of the most important being privacy and security. There obviously is a lot of concern about student privacy and family privacy and data sharing, and all of these systems comply with FERPA and can be designed to have very strict privacy controls and security features. I actually will emphasize here that one of the reasons we're interested in this is that we actually suspect this is a more secure method of dealing with student data than many programs currently have, where quite frankly you have paper files sitting around which may not even be locked up that have confidential information in them, and actually moving to a professionalized process like an online data system with those kind of strict security would actually be an improvement, we think, for the safety of many of our children's data. Some common features also include attendance taking in a variety of different methods, including some systems that work with a card scanner or with direct data entry from program providers. Attendance and enrollment. Many of them have scheduling and operational tools to help programs actually lay out their schedules. If you're bringing in multiple different providers of a dance club and a soccer team, and you need to sort of stretch out your schedule, they've got some nice tools that help with that. Very important piece of this that Mairead already mentioned in terms of how they're doing this in Rochester is the ability to collect data that can be used for reporting and evaluation and for program improvement. There's an incredibly wonderful opportunity here to help programs have access to the kind of data that can help them choose where to focus their program improvement efforts. These systems all work on web-based access, so they can be accessed in many cases from computer, from tablets, from phones, can be flexible and mobile for folks who are out running programs and may need to get information without necessarily being at a desk. And many of these systems then have built-in capacities to help with appropriate data sharing between the after-school program and the school system, or between the after-school program and their funder, or different sites of the same after-school program. So NYSAN has made some recommendations to the state around this. One of our first, and I think the most important, that we would certainly encourage other states considering this, buy, don't build. There are several commercial vendors out there who are running strong programs that we were very impressed with when we got a chance to see them. We're not advocating for any particular system. We are absolutely positively not taking a stance on a particular vendor, but we do believe that the state would be far more cost effective to choose a commercial vendor who could scale up than to create their own. And I think a lot of states have gotten into this problem in other kinds of large data systems, where they build their own system, and then 5 years down the line, they no longer can find folks who can provide technical assistance to support it. Whereas if you go with a commercial vendor, you have lots of different folks across the nation who are helping make sure that there remains a market for technical assistance for that program. Think big. We really do believe that this is a system that should be available and voluntary, as I say, but should be available to any program in the state who wants to participate. The more data we get, the more we're all in sync, the more we're all part of this conversation, the more we can advocate effectively, the better we can understand our impact on the children, the more we can make sure that all of the state spending around after school is really supporting quality programming. We do think it's crucial that these programs contain outcomes tracking and not just demographic and enrollment information. It's really with the outcomes where we begin to understand better how our programs work, but also where we have the chance to impact the education conversation. As Mairead mentioned, the kinds of outcomes that Rochester is looking at tracking are around social emotional learning, child well-being, learning strategies and skills, what they call the college and career mindsets or the 21st century skills, or thank you, Rhode Island, the essential skills. We want to have an opportunity with an after-school statewide system to have our outcomes that we care about that reflect those kind of social and emotional values be tracked and then be able to be brought into the P20 system and the education conversation because we've now brought that data to the field. So really can't stress enough that we see a huge advocacy opportunity here for the whole child and for joining the education conversation around all the different components that our students need to learn, not just the academics. So in order to move this forward, NYSAN has sent a formal letter to our Office of Children and Family Services requesting that they include such a system in their Child Care Development Fund state plan for the next 2 years. We've similarly sent a formal letter to the State Education Department asking that they consider developing this as part of the P20 data system. We've advocated to the governor and the legislature that they support funding for such a system. We are also, and we'll be hearing much more about this in just a couple of minutes, already in the process of trying to develop the statewide outcomes measures that we would recommend if such a system were to be built so that we can come to our legislatures, our state ed, and our Office of Children and Family Services with a good argument as to what we would be doing when we say outcomes measures. We held in the fall a webinar series where we invited all of the commercial vendors we were familiar with to do a demonstration of their systems. This was purely for informational purposes, but it did really help folks all across New York have a better understanding of what we were talking about when we described such a system. And we hope that in having done so will help the field really buy in to why this would be a valuable thing to do. Everything that we need is going to come through grassroots advocacy, and we need the field to be on board with this in order to make this happen. And we will be releasing very shortly a brief on our data system recommendations and some of the common data system features that we found from our webinar series. And we'll make sure that all of you get the link to that as soon as it's posted on our website. And that really is just intended to be a very quick resource for the field as to what this idea of a statewide data system is and why it's worth advocating for. And finally, just to close, a couple of the challenges that we've run into so far. The big one is the increase in public concern around educational data privacy. As those of you in New York may know, there was a very controversial contract between the New York State Education Department and a particular provider that raised the hackles of a lot of folks in the state legislature. So this became, unfortunately, a very bad legislative session to try to move an after-school data system, even though we're talking about doing this in a way that is fully compliant with federal law and, quite frankly, in practice, would require parental consent for the vast majority of what we would be asking programs to do, because quite frankly, that's how after school works. We like to talk to our parents. We like to reach out to them. We're not trying to bamboozle anybody, and we're not trying to do anything with their data that they wouldn't want to do to help improve outcomes for their children. We also are looking for funding. Our estimated cost is in the neighborhood of $2 million to start up. And then with some recurring annual costs for staffing and licensing and things like that. So although we think that is actually a fraction of the cost that it would take for every program in the state to buy their own system, it's also not a small ask. And so that's an ongoing conversation with our governor's office and our legislature. And finally, we really, as you'll hear in just a second, recognize that narrowing it down to a set of outcomes measures that everyone in the state is going to track will be challenging. We really need, field buy-in. We want to reflect what's best about our field. We want to reflect where we have highest impact. So that's a conversation that we've been eager to start and are looking forward to continuing. So I'm now going to hand it over to Allie Leidy, NYSAN's Policy and Communications Coordinator, to talk to you a little bit about that outcomes process.
Thank you, Nora. Forward. Okay. So as Nora mentioned, in looking at a statewide data system, we had to start thinking about some common outcomes that we would like the field to measure. So in doing that, our long-term goal was to get consistent data across the entire state of New York for the after-school field that can be used to make the case for after-school to policymakers and funders. And we started with an objective of getting agreement on 5 to 10 common outcomes indicators that all programs will measure for use in the same way. And as Nora mentioned, it is a difficult process. So I wanted to take you through the process that we've gone through to give an idea of what you could do in your state or in your community. The most important thing for us was not to reinvent the wheel. There are so many existing outcomes frameworks out there that we did not feel that it was important to determine all of the possible outcomes that an after-school program might affect for use. We wanted to take a look at what's already out there and select from that. And today we're going to talk about some of those as well. Then we wanted to select priority outcomes, and those are the ones where after-school has an impact and that show that after-school has an impact. They're also ones that would be appropriate for all ages, so that those 5 to 10 common outcomes measures would work for all the programs. And they reflect the importance of the whole child, which is really important to us, as Nora mentioned. We then needed to narrow down from the priority outcomes measures, and what everyone would agree on and how to measure the same way. And our process after defining a group of those would be to consult with the field to select the final 5 to 10 recommended outcomes measures. So as I mentioned, we started with a review of existing frameworks and tools, and this list here on the slide are the ones that we decided to take a look at. It's not a comprehensive list of all of the ones that are out there, but it is a good list of frameworks and tools that are currently available. So I wanted to go in detail on a couple of these. The Partnership for After-School Education put together the After-School Youth Outcomes Inventory. It's available for free to everyone at the link that you see on the slide. The outcomes in the After-School Youth Outcomes Inventory are put into 4 different categories: social and emotional, academic, college and work readiness, and health and wellness. And for each of those categories, there are sample indicators and sub-indicators, as well as suggested measurement tools. So I'm going to show you a couple pages so that you have a better understanding, in case you haven't seen it, of how this tool is laid out. So this is one page out of the social and emotional outcomes inventory. And let's start with the first outcome, is improved communication skills. That's then separated into 2 indicators, which you see shaded in the dark green: effective expression of thought and feelings, and increased assertiveness in social context. So those are both indicators that lead up to that outcome, but they break it down further into the sub-indicators. So for effective expression of thoughts and feelings, the sub-indicators are frequency of feeling understood and ability to speak in public. So the following page then shows measurement tools where you might actually be able to measure those sub-indicators. And for improved communication skills, we have the California Health Kids Survey Module B and a description of that tool, and the Youth Experiences Survey 2.0 and a description of that tool as well. And they have tools available for each of the indicators and sub-indicators through the whole outcomes inventory. The other one that I wanted to show you today is a shared vision for youth, common outcomes and indicators. This was put together by the Forum for Youth Investment, the National Collaboration for Youth, and Ready by 21. And it is also available for free online at the link listed on the slide. they separate into developmental domains, including healthy and safe, and an indicator there is thriving, connected, which includes connecting and leading, productive, which includes learning and working. And then for each of those developmental domains, they have outcomes, indicators, and possible measures available. So I'm going to show you a page from theirs as well. So this page is for connected, and as I said, the domain is separated into connecting and leading, and they separate each of those with the outcomes. For connecting, we have positive identity, positive relationships, social emotional development, and cultural competence. And those are then broken down into indicators. So for positive identity, we have youth develop a strong sense of self, and youth develop positive values. And then possible measures for that are Colorado's Trust Toolkit for evaluating positive youth development, the Developmental Assets Profile by Search, and the Junior Girl Scout Group Experience Outcomes Measures Guide. So this is another great tool for breaking down those outcomes that after-school programs can affect for youth and figuring out specific indicators and how to measure them. I wanted to give a brief overview on the other tools that we took a look at. The P21 21st Century Student Outcomes is available for free online as well, and includes core subjects in 21st century skills, learning and innovation skills, information, media, and technology skills, and it includes outcomes and indicators. And then the Achieving, Connecting, and Thriving Results Framework is also available online in the categories that are listed here. And the 4-H Common Measures include some science indicators as well as some measurement tools. And then we'll also see that Girl Scouts and some of 4-H actually separate their tools by their measurements by age group, as well as the Strive Together that separates by grade level and includes some great research and measures and interventions. And that's available as well in the link listed on the slide. So once we reviewed the frameworks and took out all of the outcomes, we categorized those into the categories on this slide: social and emotional, academic, college readiness, work readiness, health and wellness, citizenship, and safety. And that gave us a great overview of all of the outcomes that were listed in the frameworks in these categories. So we had to narrow it down, and we had to take some key considerations to do that. So we wanted to talk about which of these outcomes actually influence programs in New York. So what are the important things that we need to be able to say from a political aspect as well? Also, what outcomes do we expect that all programs influence? Because we would be asking all programs to be measuring the same things in the same way. And looking at long-term versus short-term outcomes, how measuring the indicators would be useful to the field, because we want to make sure that it's useful to us and to the field as a whole, and then also useful to individual programs so that they can use that data to improve the services that they're offering and to advocate for their own program as well. And also the ease of measurement, any added costs that might come into play in measuring these outcomes, and making sure, again, as I said, that the indicators are appropriate for all age levels. And we narrowed down the following priority outcomes that are listed on the slide, and I won't read them all to you. There are a lot that we are still working on narrowing down from there. So our next step is to select priority outcomes measures using the priority outcomes that we have and existing frameworks to then identify recommended outcomes measures for each priority outcome, and then we're going to select 15 to 20 of those that we will put out to the field and ask for feedback to really get buy-in from the programs that we work with about what outcomes will be useful to them and what they think they can measure to further down to that final 5 to 10 outcomes. So I'm going to turn it back over to Nora to talk about advocating for data and with data.
And we will be very brief, so we leave plenty of time for questions. But we did want to emphasize that this conversation that we're having is not in a vacuum. We really are doing this work at NYSAN because we see real value in these data conversations for moving the larger goals of the field towards increasing public funding, increasing awareness of quality, increasing understanding of the impact that we have on children's lives. So I want to start by emphasizing data matters. If you run programs yourself, if you work with programs, it's really important to understand how much elected officials and policymakers like data. And I think it's particularly important to emphasize that although we do wonderful things with the compendium, for those of you unfamiliar with Expanding Minds and Learning Opportunities, definitely check it out. And lots of great things, talking about Deborah Vendel's research and the Castle research and other folks that we can go to demonstrate that after school does have impacts. It's really important that we start developing local, on-the-ground, state-specific and locality-specific data so that people know that the work is happening in their communities as well. And just always a piece of advice, when you are sharing data, please make sure that you pair it with an anecdote to help your local elected official understand what that data really means in practice. If you don't collect data, please start. I think that can be challenging for programs to know where to begin. I think people often get very hung up on what data should they collect. We actually love GRASA's process for developing outcomes data. We obviously at NYSAN are doing a long-term process on developing data. We are, as large organizations that are trying to represent the field, we have a lot of obligation to bring people in. I think I would say that on the flip side for programs, start somewhere. Start collecting data, collect the data that makes the most sense to you for the situation you're in, for the students you serve, and then build from there. Join the local conversations that are happening in your community about what data to collect. Join your statewide conversation about what data to collect. But do begin to develop even things as fundamental to your program operations as attendance, and as Mairead mentioned with Rochester, grade point average, which many of you do have access to through your data sharing agreements with your school districts. The compelling case that it makes when Rochester can now walk into their local elected officials and say every student who participates in our after-school programs on average increases their school day attendance by 4 days. Every student on average increased their grade point average by 0.87, which is basically a whole letter grade. That's really concrete and amazing data, and basically information that all of your programs have buried somewhere in all those stacks of paper on their desk where they keep all their enrollment forms. So convert it into a usable form that you can use for your advocacy. And don't get swept up into feeling like you only have to do academic data. Again, part of why Allie walked you through a couple of those free tools that you can access is to help you and your programs identify ways you can find social and emotional indicators and whole child indicators and essential skills for workforce and college readiness that you can also track so that it doesn't just have to be test scores. And again, an important point to always emphasize, you don't have to share everything. You are always free to share the data that makes your program look best, but share that data accurately and honestly. Don't ever fudge your numbers. It will come back to bite you, and it doesn't do us any good in the field as a whole. We need to be reliable and believable, and so really do present yourself in your best light, but your honest light. And last thing, really just want to invite all of you to participate. If you're here in New York with us at NYSAN, with your local regional networks, Rochester's is farther along than some of our other regional networks are in developing community outcomes and data systems, but lots of our other regional networks are having conversations about it, and if they're not yet, maybe you're the person to start that conversation. So please do begin to really think about what you can do to move forward a joint conversation on after school and data. And don't forget to include your school leaders in that conversation. School leaders want to know about the impact of out-of-school time. As Mairead was telling you, they actually have been looking at individual student-level indicators, specifically because the school folks want that opportunity to get information about how their individual students are doing in after school and what's working for them, and are they moving the needle on some of the social and emotional. So your school leaders can be great partners in advocating for this. All right, we're going to turn to questions and answers. I want to go ahead and invite all of you to put your questions into the chat box, and we will push them up to our presenters so that everyone has a chance to share about them, but that's going to be a little easier than having everyone call things out with as many people as we currently have on this webinar. So again, please start typing questions.
So I understand.
Okay. So first question we got, can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? Yes, we will be more than happy to provide that, and we will post the full recorded webinar as well. Second question, the challenges that states and organizations face in implementing across a variety of different organizations. Absolutely. And Mairead, do you want to make sure that you unmute yourself so you can talk a little bit about how some of this has worked in Rochester with the United Way initiative? Are you unmuted? Mairead? Okay. Hopefully, she will be able to unmute herself. I think it's *6, Mairead. Oh. Okay. In the meantime, while Mairead is getting herself unmuted, let me just say that this is actually a lot of why we have been trying to do a lot of community outreach around this. We know that buy-in from the beginning is crucial to getting organizations to agree to do multiple collections of multiple data points that they may not have been doing in the past. We also have been very sensitive in trying to identify outcomes that could work for every program. We recognize that certain programs are going to want to collect lots of other outcomes information beyond just those because they have specific parts of their program that do different things that they want to have outcomes to track. But our goal is to identify sort of a core that are similar enough that we think all programs genuinely have impacts in those areas. All right, so we are trying to, I think you just muted all callers.
I opened a few. These are all.
Okay, so Mairead, try *6 again because I know you want to answer and would be very helpful to answer this question.
Hello?
Yay, okay, so Mairead, we'll let you weigh in there.
So I think the question before I started muting and unmuting was about any challenges about comprehensive data collection, is that correct?
Yes, and specifically sort of, the challenges of having multiple organizations all collecting the same data.
Okay, so I think really it's a matter of buy-in and making sure that the community partners understand the importance of the data as you have described in your slides, and so that they can really understand how it helps them make a compelling case, and to really get that buy-in and ownership from the community providers so that they know we have done our best to streamline the process for them and hopefully have made it for one point of entry for that data, but that the partners understand what the benefit really is to them on the ground as well.
Thanks, Mairead. So also got a question about the undue emphasis on academic achievement. Can you talk a little bit about how, with your outcomes work in Rochester, you've been focusing on social-emotional intelligence and the whole child, as well as academics?
Yes, absolutely. So we have been looking very closely. One of the outcomes that rose to the top was academic competencies, not necessarily academic achievement. And so when we're talking about competencies in academics, we're talking about the ability to acquire, master, and apply academic skills to solve problems, make decisions, and achieve life learning and life goals. So really we're looking at communication, executive functioning, organization skills, and habits of mind when we in Rochester are talking about academic competencies. I realize it gets a little confusing because the United Way is looking at GPAs as part of their data collection through the COMET system. And a lot of the reason behind that is truly because the United Way needs to make a case to the community every year to continue to provide that funding that they then turn around and provide to the community. and they found that the most compelling information that they could share was related to the impact on the academics directly. But the United Way is part of the GRASA selection of outcomes and tools, and they are very strong advocates and believers in those academic competencies and not necessarily the academic achievement. So we are moving forward on the same page, hopefully.
And I'll just jump in there briefly to say that I actually prefer GPA to test scores. If you look at some of Paul Tutt's book, How Children Succeed, where he talks about James Heckman's research, one of the things that's actually better about GPA than test scores is that it, in many cases, measures persistence and effort, and as opposed to sort of a rote standardized intelligence or sort of memorization. And so it actually can have a more, is more likely to actually be predictive of college and career success, although it certainly is far from perfect. I also want to emphasize that one of the outcomes measures that Mairead was talking about that GRASA is looking at closely is the mini DESA, which does look at a lot of skills that I think we would call sort of social emotional as well. So one other question that we got that I wanted to just briefly talk about was a question on data privacy and government law around this. So for those of you who are interested in this, the governing federal law is FERPA, Family Education Reporting and Privacy Act, and there is actually some good information that has been put out by the Harvard Family Research Project on after school and FERPA and how it applies and how programs can share data and still be in compliance with privacy law. The Data Quality Campaign has also done some very helpful work on this. When we circulate the webinar, I will circulate a link to the Harvard's Family Research Project's two-pager on these after-school data and privacy law, as that's a more accurate source than I can be in this sort of brief period of time. And then our next question has to do with, are we actually talking about a format for data collection, or do people create their own? I actually think that's a great question. That is very much what we're talking about with a statewide data system, is precisely that it would no longer require programs to create their own formats. It actually would be a database that everyone could log into, that would already have all the fields, that would already have a whole structure, and that programs would just then enter the data into. So a lot of our goal in advocating for a statewide data system is to move away from having everyone have to have their own. And Mairead, I wondered if you could actually talk a tiny bit about COMET, since you in Rochester actually have experience with having a shared data system, and what the process is like of using that actual COMET system.
Right. So it's online. It's a relational database. So what happens is the frontline user, the frontline worker, for example, in an out-of-school time program may log in to COMET using their password, and then they are able to seamlessly view every piece of that relational database that's available to their program and to that individual staff member. So maybe the frontline employee can view certain tools and surveys, as well as reporting attendance and time in and out of programs. So that they can quickly enter that data. It's then available to the program administration as well, so they can look across their own program, and then all of that feeds into the Children's Institute database so that they have access to not only that provider but the entire community's information. And then COMET also works with the Rochester City School District to have student-level and aggregate-level information from the district as well. And so they're able to, although they de-identify the students, they're able to match them and report out that information in a manner that's consistent with FERPA.
Thanks, Mairead. I know we are past time. I want to answer one last question quickly, and then we will wrap up, and thank you all for your patience with us. But the last question was whether non-school-based after-school programs can have access to student GPAs. It's a slightly complicated question in that it largely depends on your relationship with your local schools and school districts. There are absolutely ways that it can be done, particularly if you're getting state or local funding, because FERPA has very strong exceptions for programs that are accessing data in order to evaluate the use of state or local or federal funds. But even in cases where there's not, if there are appropriate protections in place, if the data matching is not done through the after-school program but is done through the school district, and the results that are being provided to the program are aggregated rather than individual student level, that absolutely can be done. So it's a matter of developing a relationship with your own school district, and there is some information in the resources at the Harvard Family Project two-pager lists that might help with that. We also would be happy, and I will put forward our final slide here, to answer questions as we can to help people with individual situations in their area. So you can find us on the web. If you go to our website, you will find both Allie's and my contact information. You can follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook, and we would be more than happy to keep you connected through our listserv, which sends out sort of breaking news for the after-school field, as well as a monthly digest that summarizes the best of the research and advocacy tools that we've heard about this month. So thank you all so much. Let me give a special thanks to you, Mairead, for sharing what's the exciting work that's happening in Rochester.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate everyone's time and participation today. We will post the recording and share with everyone who is registered for this when it does go up. Thank you so much. Have a great day.